Welcome back to the Nick Bartlett Show, everybody. And joining me on the show today is Haghverdian and Paul Garrison. This duo create content for the East Village Times and also make up the SDSU podcast. Andre's been on the show twice before, and this is actually Paul's first time, so we'll throw him some split fingers, something like that. Thank you guys for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I kind of felt like I'm the third wheel. You know what I mean? With like the way you guys are big buddies and everything like that, and so hopefully I don't take away too much of the chemistry.
Yeah. I'm sure your weekly podcast outweighs the three times me and Andre have spoken.
That's
And
not the way
also
I heard it. That's not the way I heard it. But okay, all right.
for
It's good to
sure.
be back. It's good to be back on the show, Nick. Good to see you.
Appreciate it, Andre. Today we're going to talk about San Diego State's outlook this season, their new head coach, and where the Aztecs stand in realignment. They're still a huge player out there. I think people have forgotten about that. As always, be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons on YouTube. You know, it's on Twitter. I'm talking YouTube here. Forget following us on Twitter. Just kidding. But all right, guys, let's get to the question. First thing first is kind of what I hinted at. Is there any team that, and I'll actually start with Paul here. Is there any team that you feel got screwed more than San Diego State during realignment? I know WSU and Oregon State are kind of thrown out a lot, but last year SDSU was, and by all intents and purposes, headed to the Pac-12. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a long list of teams that got screwed. And I think San Diego State is just kind of another one. You know, there are deals that like Stanford got, for instance, where they're not going to be getting a whole bunch of money from the ACC. They're going to have to travel across the country. As much as they still get to have, I guess, the prestige, not like a campus like Stanford is going to be struggling for money, but the idea that where they're at and their place in it, I think there's a long list, but San Diego State's one of them. I mean, I wrote an article in the lead up to that effectively, they had landed all these recruits and were building a really solid recruiting class because they were telling them, hey, we're going to the Pac-12. And when that didn't happen because the Pac-12 effectively imploded, a lot of those cats went everywhere. Washington area, it was a Power 5, Power 4 group. So yeah, I think San Diego State could be considered that. I think there's others that are there, but you could put the Aztecs there.
What are your thoughts on that, Andre?
Yeah, I mean, we had the athletic director JD Wicker on our podcast for our 100th episode, and he said he woke up that Friday morning thinking that they were going to be announcing that they were going to the Pac-12, and everything kind of just blew up, in a matter of an hour or two. And so yeah, they definitely feel like they were jolted out of the Pac-12. And then looking back on it, could they have made plays for other conferences? Was that even an option? Things like that. People want to play hindsight of 2020. But yeah, they definitely were someone that had done the right things and were trending towards a Pac-12 invite, and it just kind of blew up in a matter of hours. So you can definitely make that case that they were one of the teams that were screwed.
I just feel, people who watch the show know I'm a WSU alum. I feel like WSU and Oregon State get all kind of, because of the Pac-2, the talk, and people seemingly forget about San Diego State and what happened to them just because of, as you mentioned, the dominoes falling literally every which way in the Pac-12. So saying teams all over the country. So I just think it's important to note that what happened last year and that SDSU was. I feel kind of the third team that got screwed most. I hear you're on Stanford, but just from where I stand, it feels like WSU, Oregon State, and SDSU. Moving forward,
the only thing I would add about the remaining Pac-2, if we're using the word screwed, right, meaning outside of their control, I think there was a lack of leadership, especially from I think Washington State. A lot of this I think falls in their president's lap for the position that he had in that conference. And so I think the difference is some of that is reaping what they sowed. They had poor leadership. They tried to get more, again, reportedly, right? They tried to get more than what people were offering. They weren't content with kind of being in that middle class level. Whereas San Diego State was just along for the ride. They were like, hey, we're going to give you Southern California back. So, I mean, if you're using that, then that way of screwed, outside of their hands. They just were doing what they were told, following through, as Andre pointed out. Had some overtures from the Big 12, but the Pac-12 was like, no, we got you. I think maybe that would maybe bump them up a little bit in terms of those three, because I don't think they really had a choice. They just went along with it, and the kind of the group that they hitched their wagon to fell apart.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you say that. I won't. I don't want. I was talking off the record with someone else. You're actually you're the second person I've kind of heard say that about WSU. So it's interesting. I don't want to comment further, but that definitely holds some legitimacy. That's definitely interesting. Screwed might not be the right word. It always sounds good when you're asking questions.
Right.
We'll say made it difficult, I guess, is maybe
Sure.
the safest. But moving forward here, I'll go to Andre first this time. Pretty standard question. How do you feel Sean Lewis will impact the program immediately and in the long term as well?
Well, this wasn't just a coaching change that went from a defensive minded coach to an offensive minded coach. There's a big shift in just age too. Brady Hoke, Rocky Long were old school, tough, rugged coaches that had just played and coached for 40 years, right? And with NIL, with the changing landscape of college football, a lot of fans, we heard it all the time, felt like the game had passed, someone like Coach Hoke by. They weren't enthusiastic. They weren't passionate about playing in this NIL landscape. And what Sean Lewis has done, he's a complete opposite. He's 37 years old. He's younger than Paul and I. And he's brought that energy and that passion to San Diego and the fan base because he's embraced NIL. He's done the Lamborghinis on the Snapdragon Stadium field with the photo shoots and recruiting. He's gone out to the community and spoken and talked. When he speaks, people love the passion and the energy he talks with. He talks a mile a minute. Very different than Coach Hoke when he spoke, whether it was at a press conference, on the sideline, or an event or whatever. And I think the immediate results is people see the fire and passion that he has, and they're reinvigorated. Now, will that mean more season ticket sales? We haven't seen the updated figures yet from the school. Will that mean more wins on the field that will draw more people in towards the end of the season into next year and beyond? That's yet to be determined. But the immediate results have played to par, which is just the excitement and the exuberance that he's brought to the school and the football team.
Yeah, for me, I would phrase it maybe a little bit different. I actually, you would go out to practice, and Brady Hoke was the first person out there. He was getting the tackling dummies out. He was bouncing. The speed at which they practice at is all like supposed to be all different. It's not that much different. They're a little bit more efficient in the way in which they have people take reps during practice, but. It's not even, it even remains to be seen that even if their efficiency is more effective, but they practice fast under Hoke. Hoke was bouncing around. He was very hands on, especially of course at the defensive line. And I think to Andre's point, where Hoke wasn't good is he wasn't good with the PR game. And he just didn't care about trying to talk to the media. He didn't care about having any social media presence. He didn't care about, but I don't think their passion is any different. I think it's just there's a skill set that Sean Lewis possesses that, as an old school coach, Brady Hoke did not. I don't think he hung it up. I don't think he did any of those things. I don't even think the game left him behind as much as people say. They were running the same system Utah did, and that's working pretty darn good. In terms of their offense, and obviously the San Diego State and the defense that they've had for a long time. So I think that is the most immediate effect. Completely agree with Andre. Just the ability to be able to completely dominate a press conference, to get people excited, to get people thinking and talking about San Diego State football and not just their basketball program. I think those have been their immediate impact. I think the next impact is San Diego can have a rabid fan base. You look at the Padres and you look at the fact that they're selling out and they've been doing this for years. But San Diego wants to see offensive football. I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, even when Donnell Pumphrey, Rashad Penny were running through, Jack Murphy Stadium, they weren't having the same level of engagement as they had in like the Marshall Faulk eras, or my dad will tell me about how in the 70s they outdrew the Chargers because they had Eric Coryell and they had a brand of football that was exciting, that was fun, and that was passionate. And so I think what they're trying to do is I think that they try JD Wicker. Andre mentioned him. I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to take everything that was great about Hoke and keep it. Sean Lewis is a Midwestern guy. He's a run first, toughness, physical. I mean, he came from Wisconsin, right? That's where he played. But he wants to wrap it in something that is up tempo, that is fast, whether they're running the ball or passing the ball. So I think they're trying to keep everything that has made San Diego State great for 15 years, with the exception of last year. But then having it be modern, having it be flashy, and having it be something that can fill the seats at Snapdragon Stadium, because it's, everybody can tell you it's been far too empty.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's one thing I always heard, kind of author. It's not the best author; it's the best selling author. So being able to market yourself and get your program out there makes a lot of sense. One thing that concerned me a little bit, as you touched on, SDSU has historically been really good over the last decade. And I'm looking at Sean Lewis's overall stats. I know everyone pulls up, fourth in total yards and 30th in the nation in points with Kent State 2021. And last year, I want to make this, I guess you got to start with the negatives first. So he's only 24 at 31 overall as a head coach, which concerns me a little bit. Even in that 2021 year, they were 7-7 overall. With that being stated, I feel he did not get a fair shot at Colorado at all. I think he got, I won't use the same word as we used in the opening question, but no one was going to coach that offensive line. Colorado just wasn't there yet. So I don't feel he got a fair shot. And I'm really interested to see what he learned being around, someone with that kind of level of prestige in Deion Sanders, and how it'll translate to SDSU. So moving forward here, how do you expect and this one, whoever wants to take this one, feel free. How do you expect the offense to look this year with only 5 returning starters, and any early word on who's winning the quarterback battle?
I went last, Andre.
So does that mean you go first? No.
I
think that they want to play fast, as we talked about, right? They want to play run up to the huddle, run up to the line of scrimmage. They're not going to huddle, and that's going to be very different for San Diego State fans to get it used to. And a lot of what fall camp is going to be starting this week is just getting the players accustomed to that. And as Paul mentioned, I think there's this misconception that because they play fast that they're going to throw the ball 50 times and run 8 times. No, those Kent State teams that put up a lot of points, they were almost balanced 50-50 running and passing. So they do still want to run the ball. They've got probably 3 new starting offensive linemen transfers and 2 returning guards. So who neither of them played in spring because of injuries. So they're basically going to have to figure out the offensive line gelling together in a matter of a month before their first game, just to make sure they get up to speed. But I think with the offensive line and the quarterback, you mentioned AJ Duffy and Danny O'Neal. I think those are the 2 people vying for the starting role. They're the ones that are listed at the depth chart that was released 2 weeks ago at Media Day as a or, which means that the starter hasn't been picked yet. Danny O'Neal is a true freshman, early enrollee. He's fresh out of high school. And AJ Duffy obviously was at Florida State for 2, but he barely played. I think he took, maybe he's passed the ball 10 or 12 times in 2 years. So the sooner that Sean Lewis can get the quarterback decided and get ready is going to be a big difference on how the offense looks, because there's going to be a lot of new faces, as you said, at all levels. And that's what fall camp is going to be, is getting them ready to play game 1.
I wanted to hit on some of those stats that you named about Kent State. I think there's a lot more context than just the bare numbers. Yes, he has a losing record, but I think he only won 1 game his first year there, and then was able to string together some stuff. The year he left, they won 1 game. Their ability to recruit there is just really, really hard, despite some of the guys that were able to transfer that are going to be on this team that's excelled under Lewis. The other thing is, man, that administration put him under the 8 ball. Their opening games were an FCS opponent at home, and then 3 brutal bye games on the road. And so they were so beat up by the time that they would start. And if you just get, some even games in the non-conference, suddenly his record's looking a whole bunch better, and he's got a 9-win season. He's got a 10-win season that everyone's pointing to as like, oh, this was so good. So I think just the scheduling in of itself is going to be something that he's never done before. Like, they're going to play Oregon State at home, and that's not a game he's ever played before. Like, he's never coached in that game as a head coach. Is like, hey, you got a legitimate school that you can beat at home in the non-conference schedule. So I think there's a lot there. I think the key is running the football. When they were at their best, yardage wise, they were the same, but number of attempts, they ran the football way better. I actually don't completely think, despite all of the media stuff and despite how Deion Sanders went and attacked it, I don't think the offensive line was completely the most suspect thing of Colorado. If you go back to Kent State, in his last 2 years there, Marquez Cooper, who is on the Maxwell preseason list, who's at San Diego State now, he had 2,000-yard seasons. And in both of those seasons, he had far and away the most carries. But the player who was second on the team in carries was the quarterback in 1 year, and then third the year before that in 2021. Shadir Sanders' unwillingness to run the football and be part of the running game and force the defense to have to honor the QB run meant that the numbers game, which is what the spread is supposed to do, it wasn't something that they could utilize as well. And once teams kind of realize that, and then they're going to make the change later. So I think not being able to get the QB, at least to keep them honest, I think was the reason why the running game didn't really get off the ground for the Buffaloes last year. But I think that's going to be the key, because I think Sean Lewis, it works in such a way where their offense is not, and this is across college football, the offense is not, there's 5 guys and you go read across the field, and then your 5th guy, you bring it there. It's linebacker, safety, neither there, tuck, right? And if he is this offensive genius that everyone is expecting him to be, and that his reputation is, whoever the quarterback turns out to be might have to do less than other quarterbacks to still be successful, because it is so spread out, because teams are on their heels and they have to play so vanilla because of the speed in which they can't bring in personnel to match up. So it's pretty just straightforward. Blitzes don't happen too much because of that, because everyone's spread out and it's just boom, boom, boom. And so I think AJ Duffy, definitely has the inside thing. But when we asked Sean Lewis, like, what do you want to do? He said, I want to name a starter by the end of spring. And if ever there was a time for AJ Duffy to be way ahead of Danny O'Neill, it's when the kid should still be in high school at a senior prom. And whatever it is that Duffy was unable to do to like win that job outright, you would expect O'Neill to be more comfortable in the offense, more comfortable as a college player now. And so I think the competition's really, really going to be going. The other quarterback, Kyle Crum, is somebody to be paying attention to. He's a little bit older. From him, that the reports of the idea, we're not there. He had a really strong summer, and he really feels confident about, what his chances are as well.
Yeah, and Andre, is there anything you want to add? I guess I think I said is the struggling here. Basically, what I said is, how do you expect the offense to look this year with 5 returning starters? And then, as Paul was touching on, kind of what's your thoughts on the quarterback battle?
I agree with Paul. I mean, I think Sean Lewis did say he wants to name a starter after spring, and then spring came. He's like, no, we're not going to name a starter yet. So what does that tell you? I do think that it'll ultimately be AJ Duffy, because if it's close enough or they're tied, he's probably going to give the edge to a little bit more experienced player. who's been in a college system for a couple of years. But I think drawing this out maybe is asking or challenging AJ Duffy a little bit more than just handing him the starting spot after spring. So I think that's probably some coaching, mind games right there in itself. But yeah, it's running the ball, taking your shots, playing fast, converting third downs. I think those are going to be all critical for the success of the offense.
Yeah, and I guess kind of looking at my notes here, as you guys touched on, Duffy and O'Neal are both dual threats, kind of required in Lewis's system. You already touched on, for those who don't know, Marquez Cooper coming in. You already read off his stats. I wanted to add, I think he's Keenan, if Keenan Christian's still there, which I believe he is, I really think he's Marquez Cooper and Keenan Christian could be a nice combo. I remember Christian as always just being a lightning fast guy. So if you kind of have a more complete back to complement him, it can make Christian actually really electric. So that combo I feel could be pretty fun to watch. On the offensive line, every source I read literally had different information. All I know is you guys lost a lot with Cade Bennett to TCU, and offensive tackles Brandon Crenshaw Dixon, and obviously to Florida. And I think most of us out here know Drew Azapari to Washington. So yeah, I think if the offensive line is decent, I think the offense could be pretty solid. Obviously, that's a huge if, but that's kind of the one group that I'm looking at to see that I feel will determine the Aztecs offense this year. Anything you guys want to add in the offense with that before I head over? Actually, I guess my next question is about the receiving core. So anything else you want to add about the offense before we move to the receivers?
I would just say with the offensive line and the quarterback and all of it, if San Diego State was doing what they're doing now 5 years ago, all of their like lack of expectations would just be like a foregone conclusion, right? But this is the new way of college football. This sort of change in their roster, it's a little bit more than most, but there's still a ton of change everywhere. Coaching changes. I mean, all in the teams that they're playing on their schedule, and so I think in some regards this is just kind of the new normal. I mean, if you get, they do have 3 new players on the offensive line, 2 of whom have played tons of football, and one of whom, had some reps at first team with Arizona, and it's just talking about Joe Borhan is like the biggest human being you've ever seen. He's nuts. I mean, Ross Ulugalu Masuli, who is 6'3", 200 or 340 pounds, 30 pounds. I think he's listed at like 20 or 15, but they were at an event recently, and the 2 of them are standing next to him, and it looked like his kid brother. I mean, Joe, he's like a perpetual, like wherever he goes, there's a shadow. I mean, he's just a huge human being, but he's athletic and he has great bend, and it's a wonder why he left Arizona, maybe why he didn't go to Washington when the coach from Arizona went over there. But this is, I think, normal. I mean, I think this is what is going to have to happen every year. Namely, you're either going to be depending on young guys, unproven guys like all the quarterbacks that we named, or you're going to be bringing in transfers that you hope can acclimate themselves quickly and you can build a system around them. And so I think that while under like most paradigms of college football, this is like, what are you doing? This is weird. I think in the new way of college football, I think everybody's doing this. Everyone's trying to plug in new pieces that are transfers, and it's just the way that it works. If you're a P5 school, you got the transfer from a G5 or one of the lower P4 schools. And then if you're not, you got somebody who's either a backup at one of the P5 schools who wanted to play if you're a G5 school, or you got somebody from the FCS who's coming up. And those are the descriptions of the guys that San Diego State is going to be counting along their offensive line. Braden Bryant, they had him at center. He is Andre, help me with this. Is North Dakota or North Dakota State?
North Dakota.
To transfer from there. Masuli was the center last year. They felt good enough with what Braden Bryant did to move him over back to guard, which he was the year before. The interior of their line, if those 2 guys can be healthy, could be really good. And in their system where everybody is spread out, that interior of the line becomes really, really key for just the way that they run the football and things of that nature. And so that could be a strength for the team. And that's what they're going to need if they're going to be able to buck some of these expectations.
Yeah, no, I'm like I said, I'm curious to see how the offensive line plays out. If they got two good guys on the interior, though, that could definitely open up some things. As like you mentioned specifically when the offense is spread out. I guess kind of yeah. Before I go to the defense, this doesn't have to be super in depth. Super in depth. I'll start with Andre on this one. Who do you guys think will be the best playmaker out of the receiving cores? And you can throw tight ends in there also. I know you got Sean Polk, transfer from West Virginia, Kent State previously, Kai Shaw returning. Anyone else you're kind of thinking of, or those two the guys?
I would throw out there Lewis Brown the fourth. He's a transfer from Colorado State. He actually had a big game against Colorado and Sean Lewis in last year's matchup. That was a double or triple time um, game. That was like one of the best games of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did the celebration,
Yeah.
pointing to the watch it, and so he's tall. He's 6'2". He's fast. So he's the ability to be a possession guy and to be a deep threat guy. I think he's a total package when it comes to wide receiver skill sets. And I think he can really be unlocked in this offense. Jay-Sean Polk is a good name that you mentioned because he has success in this offense. He's a smaller guy. He's more of a slot guy. So he can definitely be utilized in that area as well. But at the end of the year, if we're talking about who's their leading, top receiver, I would put my money on Lewis Brown.
Paul, you
Jason, Jason Polk is where I would go. He played really well in spring camp. Was a name that was shown about, and I think if he was coming over to San Diego State, and this was right after Kent State, it wouldn't even be a question because that's why he jumped up to West Virginia, and everyone was excited about him there. Had some injuries, wasn't able to quite do it, but he's fast. He plays that slot position, which is where so much of the design of the quick screen game, of all the things that they want to be able to do. And so I would put him there. But I think Mekhi Shaw also deserves another mention. They brought in a complete stable of guys, and Mekhi has been able to stay in front of all of those guys and earn the respect of the team, which is how hard he works. He has sneaky athleticism. He's a former walk-on, so he doesn't have the measurables, but he's pretty fast, and he's just consistent and solid. And so I think all the way through. And tight end is such a crapshoot, man. I got no idea. Mikey Harrison, obviously, he caught 30 balls last year in Lewis's offense in Colorado. But they really need whoever that is to be able to be multiple in their blocking game more than anything else. So we'll see if Jude Wolf or Logan Tanner or Harrison is able to give them that multiplicity that they need.
Yeah, and I guess going back first to Andre, you're talking about Lewis Brown. He actually, statistically speaking, he had 481 yards and 5 touchdowns last year, which is actually a little bit better than Mekhi Shaw and Sean Polk. So that should be interesting. And I'm big on the speed guy, particularly for a team that's still trying to find an identity and may have some question marks on the outside of the line. If you have that one guy who can, put some pressure on the defense, I like that. And then I'm always curious when you get like a USC transfer when you're talking tight end Jude Wolf Paul. So yeah, Lewis Brown. That's going to be a name to remember for sure. Moving forward, so I got to ask it. Sorry if you guys have heard this before, answered this a million times, but it has to be asked. SDSU's defense. I mean, they've been good for a long time. We touched on at the top, good defense, good running game, and I got to ask: does he actually care about defense? Or is he literally a Mike Leach, or if you're a basketball fan, a Mike D'Antoni, where he's like, I'm just going to outscore you, and it doesn't matter. Does he care about defense?
Well, if you really want the full answer, we had him on our podcast, Coach, and we said, "Listen, man, everybody wants to talk to you about offense. We want to talk to you about defense." And we asked this question, and others related to it. And I think that way he answered it at one point is he said early as in his coaching career, maybe it was okay. You could have accused him of that, of trying to outscore everybody, like he said that. And he said that he's learned and he's grown, and that is not who he is anymore. They moved to the 4-2-5. They played the 3-3-5 at Kent State. They moved to the 4-2-5. I think primarily to get, not primarily, one of the reasons is because the 4-2-5, like the offense, is predicated on speed. much more so than the 3-3-5, and so I think that it gives kind of that synergy to the entire team, that everybody's kind of building that speed and the training that happens under Jeff Sobel, who's a longtime strength and conditioning guy with Sean Lewis. So yeah, I think he does. Honestly, I think he does. I think he's learned some of those lessons. But I also wrote an article going back to the conversations before. He would get blown out against Georgia. Actually, they played Georgia tough. They played Georgia tough, but at Kent State. But there were other ones that he would get blown out, and he would be like his point spread of how much he's given up versus how much he scored after like 3 games would be 100-30, and it just looked like, oh well, he doesn't care about. But then the rest of the year it was a lot closer, and so I think there. It remains to be seen whether playing fast just makes playing defense hard. I mean, Chip Kelly is, as an example, never really figured out how to have both those complementing pieces with the fast offense. So other people have tried and not been able to do it successfully. But I definitely think they are attempting to do something different. And I think the 4-2-5 was selected for that reason, because they want to be able to do both at a high level.
One thing I'll add to this point is when Lewis was filling out his staff, he brought in offensive coaches that he had worked with in the past, whether at Kent State or at Colorado, but none of the coaching staff he brought in on defense he had ever worked with. And that was him reflecting on, what he did wrong maybe with defensive coaches that he had under him at Kent State, and deciding that he didn't want to bring any of those guys on, and he wanted to go a new direction, a different direction, which is where Eric Schmidt comes in and some of the guys that Eric Schmidt brought in. And so I think that's a sign of his growth, of understanding, hey, it didn't work defensively in Kent State, and this is a new, different, version of defense that I want here at San Diego State. So I think that adds to Paul's point about, I think, that growth, and Sean Lewis realizes that defense is important, obviously, and he wants to get it right this time.
Yeah, and kind of so I got to read it. So actually, no, I guess I'm being a little nicer today. We'll just say, with the exception of 2020, his Kent State defenses were literally always ranked towards the bottom. So I got to start there. But
Absolutely.
Looking forward, as you were kind of touching on, bringing in new coaches and Eric Schmidt. Obviously, I'm based out of Seattle, so you're looking at he was the edge guy for the Huskies, and Braylon Trice was a first teamer. ZTF, I can't say his name anymore, with all due love and respect, honorable mention. And these are guys that he directly touched. So, and guys that obviously we saw the success that Washington had over the last couple of years. So that should be interesting in itself. But the bottom line, the fact that he's showing some sort of reflection, and that he wants to grow, I feel is probably a good thing for the defense. RIP Mike Leach. He found a way to win games, but I don't know if the defense ever was really a part of his philosophy. Obviously, you'll say that, but it's cool to see that the SDSU is making strides. In particular, I like the Eric Schmidt hired. So, and then this question, we've been talking for a while, guys. So I don't want to keep you here too long. This question, we could simplify it. I think what I asked was, who's one player we should know at every level in the defense? We could do that, or we could just change it to who's like 3 guys we should know in the defense. Either of you guys' call.
3 guys that I think you should pay attention to on the defense is, I'm going to go Marlon Lewis, transfer from Richmond, who, going back to the offensive line question, they couldn't block in the spring game. And it was to a point where the offense kind of couldn't function, and so they kind of just took him out. But he has good pedigree at the FCS level at Richmond. He's slated to be their field edge starter. That's where he's at. Looks the part, big, strong, fast. Has played a lot of football. I think he's really hungry and trying to make that NFL radar. And I think that they're that's the dream that they're all following. At the next level, I'd say Owen Chambliss, who is a freshman who redshirted at Utah. is just he is that power for specimen kind of player. He's fast. He's big. Very, very nice kid too. Very, very good with like NIL and talking with the fans and, doing all of that kind of stuff. He was listed first on the depth chart there. It'll be really interesting to see if he can hold off Cody Moon, Kyle Moretti coming over from Central Michigan. And then in the back end, Eric Butler is I think the name that people should be paying attention to. This is a kid who is now in his third year at San Diego State. He went to Corona Centennial, one of the powerhouses out here in California, but it's also like a top 15 high school across the country. He's big. He's made big plays as an underclassman, blocked a whole bunch of punts because he's just a long athlete. And they have a bunch of guys that came from power conferences. JD Coffey came from Texas, and he's held guys like that off and been able to be listed as the starter. So Eric Butler is a name I think people should be paying attention to and know.
For me, I'll go on the defensive line, Tupu Alualu.
There you go.
He was a JC transfer last year and played a lot, was a bright spot. But this year, now with a 4-man front, he's doing a little bit more, asked to do more, has a little bit more help on the edge. And he's a guy I think that's very talented, could have a really big year. Linebacker, opposite Chambliss is Tano Latuli. He was a guy who's from San Diego, actually went to Navy. Right? Was he Navy? Army. Sorry, I knew it was one of those. So he went to the Army for a year and then transferred back. He's going to be he's a starter opposite Chambliss on the depth chart. Really has a lot of speed. Playing in that as a 2 linebacker role, playing that side to side, sideline to sideline. And then I would say on the back end,
I took his Butler, by the way, just for the record. He would have said
yeah.
There's zero question. That's why I said it, because Andre would have. If he went first, he would have said Butler.
I would have.
No, there's no question. I knew when I said it. I was like, you like that one, didn't you, Andre?
I'm gonna go Bryce Phillips. He's a transfer from Tennessee State, cornerback. He's listed on the East-West Shrine Bowl top 100 list just a few days ago, along with Marlon Lewis, who is the defensive lineman that Paul mentioned. I think he and his brother is Clark Phillips III. You probably know him, Nick, from the Utah, and now playing for the Falcons, I believe. So he's got a good pedigree in his family, his older brother, and I think he has at least to depth chart wise locked down the other end of the corner battle opposite Chris Johnson, who's like the one returning corner that played last year because everybody else either went to the NFL or transferred. So Bryce Phillips came in and kind of solidified that other cornerback role. So I think he's bound for a good year as well.
Yeah, if he's remotely in the same stratosphere as his brother, he's going to lock down everyone. And I would imagine he should. Just when your brother goes to a program like Utah, I'm blanking on the player you said previously who was doing good in the community and NILs, but it makes sense when you're coached by Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley. It feels like they're more about community than football. So definitely some pieces. I'm looking over my notes. I think just you guys went more in depth, which that's why we do this. But I think just kind of if you're just looking for maybe a name out there and you're just like a casual Mountain West or a Pac-2, or we cover every conference now apparently with the realignment. Cody Moon's probably the guy at linebacker, all Mountain West caliber player. Mm-hmm. You touched on Kyle Moretti from Central Michigan. He could be really good. And you guys covered just about everyone else on my notes. So that's easy to move forward like that. And then, so kind of the last 2 questions. You can only stare at a camera for so long. I guess this is going to be a long-winded question. Let me warn you guys. What 2 games do you guys think are most important for the Aztecs' success this year? I heard one site say Oregon State. I personally think UNLV could be a really big game for SDSU. I know a lot of people have UNLV in that top 4 of the Mountain West. Obviously, everyone's picking Boise State, and from there it's UNLV, Fresno State, and Air Force. I don't think UNLV with we've done our preview. I don't think they're that good. They're definitely. I think their team's improved, but their schedule's really hard, so they might lack some confidence. And I think SDSU could get them because when you have a historical winning program, um, I just feel versus kind of a potential flash in the pan with Barry Odom and UNLV potential. I mean, they could ball out this year. So for me, that's the one game I really think could maybe propel SDSU forward. There's the long-winded questions. Bottom line, what game or two do you guys think are most important for the Aztecs this year?
Sean Lewis, the I think maybe the most important, not the important, most impressive part about his tenure is just the way he's been able to keep momentum. Everything. I mean, his hire, everyone was like, yay. And then they were able to keep most of their recruiting class. Everyone went, yay. And then they lost a bunch of guys that they wanted to keep. The transfers that you're talking about who went to Power 5 conference, and everyone went, well. And then they brought in a wave of other guys and everyone went, yay. And then, they did spring, everyone went, yay. And they saw the offense a little bit, yay, and everybody, and they've just kept the momentum. They had this huge event for the class of 2025 at the end of June. They got a bunch of guys who committed on this thing, and their recruiting class went from like 2 to 15 or whatever it is in just like a matter of a week. And everyone was just like, what? This guy is walking on water. And so I think the two games that are the most important are going to be Oregon State and Central Michigan. Only because I think that if they get 2 wins out of that, no matter what happens with Cal, I think that they walk into some of the bye weeks that are there that are letting them to be able to prep for the Mountain West, but just believing who they are as a team. And so if they can somehow figure out ways to win those games, I think that their season, takes on a completely different tenor. And I think that it's so important because, for as much faith as Sean Lewis has built up, it's still faith, and they need to see some substance of what he's doing. If this year is going to be a successful year, which I think ultimately getting to a bowl would be a success.
Yeah, for me, I would say I subscribe to the theory that winning your conference is like the goal of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And this year they play one less conference game, 7 instead of 8, because of the Washington State, Oregon State alliance, right? So they play. They were already scheduled to play Oregon State from the home and home that they had already done in non-conference, and then Washington State got added. Took Fresno, which is their rival, off the schedule this year. So no battle for the old oil can this year.
Weird.
But I think what the biggest games are, if you look at it, the Boise State game, obviously, you mentioned UNLV, but I look at Air Force, the last game of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not last year's Air Force game was one of the most shocking games that I can remember in San Diego State. Not because they just got blown out, but because of how uncompetitive the defense was.
Yeah.
And it's going to be the last game of the season. Could be a battle for who gets to play in the conference championship game. Could be a deciding game to make a bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that game at home to finish the season is going to be a crucial game for whatever goal that the team has set. So I think that one's going to be a big game.
Yeah, that's a great call. And I was at that game, covering it. And at Air Force after the game, they let like everybody, all the fans and everybody come onto the field, and they're like throwing the footballs. All the Air Force guys look like they could have played another game. You're just like, they were fresh. You know what I mean? Like they didn't even look like, and they're in their uniforms still. And they looked as good in their football uniforms after playing San Diego State as they do in their dress uniforms. You know what I mean? Like it was just, you're just like, oh, wow. Only one team played a football game, and then we go to the post-game press conference in San Diego State. They're just shell-shocked. That's a great call, Andre.
Yeah, that's where I don't really realize, like, obviously the impact of, when you're covering all the teams, the impact of how much that one loss was. Obviously, you see it from the outside, but it's interesting to hear that from your take. And then I guess for all those out there who aren't like diehard SDSU fans, kind of the projections I've seen are they got them at like 4.5 wins. You're ranked around like 90th nationally. Me personally, I think of them as like a 6-win team this year. I think they should make a bowl as one of those 2 games, as the guys touched on. really going to determine things this year. But again, the Mountain West, I feel outside the top four, there's lots to be kind of determined. So we're just going to have to wait and see, obviously, with all the changes. And then in closing, guys, we made it to the end here. I got to ask you, is there anything that I forgot? I probably did. Maybe I didn't. But is there anything else you guys like to add about SDSU, the college football landscape, the Mountain West, or really anything? We got Olympics going on too. What are your guys' thoughts?
Even about San Diego State, I'm actually pretty excited to see what the returners do on special teams. Jay Sean Polk has a long history of being a really good kick returner. And Keenan Christian is one of those guys who also has some big plays. So they're not going to be able to kick it away from anybody, which I think they were doing last year. And then, Mekhi Shaw being able to I think have another year at punt return. I wouldn't be surprised if you could see something big from him as well. So I think that's another kind of piece of this equation is that, I think that if they are slow in some of the other facets, if they can get a boost on special teams, get some scoring that way or some good field position, I think that can go a long way.
I'm going to stick to special teams and go with a long snapper.
Oh, there you
Probably
go.
hasn't happened a lot on this show.
Yeah.
But Ryan Wintermeyer, who's a senior, he's been a starter as a long snapper since a true freshman. He was just named to the Patrick Manley Award watch list, which is the nation's top long snapper. I remember he was one of the first people when he committed to San Diego State I interviewed, wrote an article on, and I actually dug into the whole long snapper profession and what the art of long snapping, I should say. And it's pretty wild and definitely gave me more appreciation for that position than I had before. But he's someone that's definitely he's long snapped for Matt Ariza and Jack Browning, who's now in the NFL. So he's, and I can't remember him having one bad snap. It's almost flawless.
Why would you do that to the man?
Well, he's knock on wood. But he's a guy that I think you will see next year in the NFL, whether he goes undrafted or gets drafted. I think he's got that potential for that skill set. And so I'll throw him out there as a last parting shot.
You guys are both true footballers because when I leave out the special teams, you threw them in there. I respect that. You can't leave out special teams. And actually, I've talked enough. I'll make it quick on kind of like you're saying. Special teams are like both you're saying. Special teams, when you are projected to win 4.5 games, that can quickly turn into 6 or 7 in college football. I think they called it Beamer Ball. And then, so guys, I just want to say thank you guys for coming on the show again. I seriously appreciate both you guys' time.
Thanks you, man.
Thanks, man. We appreciate it.
And then in closing here, probably said twice, but I want to give you guys your flowers. So I always see Andre, like I said, he's been on the show. I think this is his third time. I always see Andre posting about sports that may fly under the radar. I've seen some posts about women's soccer. And we've talked about music on the previous shows. But I just want to say I feel you do a good job of representing underrepresented communities. And I always like following you on X. And Paul, first time on the show, but after creeping on your ex, I gotta say, it really seems like you have an absolutely beautiful family. I mean that, and that's something I strive for in the future. So appreciate both you guys. Should be a fun year for SDSU. No one really has an exact idea of how this is going to play out, but it's really an important year for them in the timing of things. Don't count out SDSU in realignment. San Diego speaks for itself, and I'll leave it at that. You can follow Andre on X at AHAGHVER23 and Paul at PADREDECUATRO. I'll read it one more time. I usually wouldn't do it, but why not? You can follow Andre at AHAGHVER23 and Paul at PADREDECUATRO. You can also check out their work on eastvillagetimes.com as well. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and stay yourself.